I got a suggestion from a recent video, or a question from a recent video, about organic towns and whether I knew of it or would treat it on the channel, and I did not know of it. And I am so glad that the viewer, whose name I can't recall, I'm afraid now, suggested this, because Organic Towns, which is a publication from Headless Hydra Press, is a set of rules and procedures to start, grow, and manage an organic settlement in any ttrpg. And it is system neutral. It's a supplement for GMs that can be used in a variety of different ways. And I would say for the soloist, it also could serve as basically a game in and of itself. We have a peek here at my town of Nightwood, and my town of Nightwood has been settled by a mage, settled and ruled by a mage and a scholar and a military commander, and I'm working on that town here. I also was beginning to build up a town using the rules here, and there are different ways to use the rules and structures of this book. So we're going to go through it, and I'll give you a peek into what is offered here as we take a look first off at the credits, and then I'll talk about the different strengths and challenges of working with this material. It is unique, I think, in terms of RPG supplemental material that I'm aware of, where you get to build something and maintain it. And the name Organic Towns is very apt because it is a breathing, living organism within the structure of RPG, that things will change, events will happen, and the population will grow and decrease, and the morale of the town people will change, and the crime rate will change. So you're getting, if you follow the rules in the book, and you can even modify them to get something that feels very much alive. The book starts with some explanation of its assumptions, which is that it is based in sort of a fantasy world with a technology similar to 13th century medieval Europe. There's some discussion of how you could change this and modify all the things in here to fit even like a sci-fi section. And it talks about the fact that there are different ways to use the rules, and there are explicitly mentioned 3 different ways. One is the rules as written, to build up a town from scratch. The other is to build up your town and not use some of the calculations that are involved in it, which concern tracking population growth and something called settlement points and a defense score and time spent building things. And then the third way is to just build your town and then start to maintain it and make new construction projects. And I have worked to prep for the video. I've done that starting at the end, and then I've also done starting at the very, very beginning, which is to say starting from scratch. And I'll talk about what that means and looks like later on. The key mechanics in the game are what's known as settlement points. So settlement points will allow you to construct buildings or to take settlement actions, and we'll see what those mean as we go. They are based on the population of your town. So if you have a small village with 257 residents, the way you do it is you're going to divide your population by 10 and round up. So in that case, you would get 26 settlement points each month. And everything in the book, every action, every construction, comes with an associated settlement point cost as well as time cost. There are some other things to track in your town's life, one of which is morale. It's a modifier that can be positive or negative. And resources. There are lumber, stone, and metal resources, and you decide at the outset what the abundancy or rarity of those resources is going to be, and then based on that you get modifiers to them. So when I was deciding, when I worked on my first town that I had just kind of automatically settled, it was the village of Nightwood. It was by a forest, so I had decided that lumber was going to be an abundant resource and that metal was going to be scarce and stone was just going to kind of be adequate. And as a result, when lumber is abundant, or when anything is abundant, the cost to use it is lowered by 33%. If something is rare, the cost is raised by 33%, and if something is adequate, it is neutral. Each of the buildings that are available to you to construct will tell you what resources you need to use, and you make your adjustment accordingly. So the first thing you're doing is you are situating your town in the geography of the area, and then you are going to have the changed resource and settlement point cost for things modified accordingly. There are random events in the book, and you will be rolling on various tables. We'll take a look at how that works as part of the sort of sequence of play. There is a section here saying, it's GM's discretion, and that you could decide that you are going to award settlement points for something that isn't necessarily written in the book. When I started my town, I decided to award each month an extra 10 settlement points just to represent the sort of strength or frontier nature of those who were settling the town, and also to give myself a few more things to do at the very beginning. Weather is, there aren't weather tables here, so this is something that I think should have been integrated a little bit more, but you could on your own bring in weather as time passed and have an impact, but there is no actual table for that, and we'll talk about that later. There is a handy table given for if you're importing something from a system that has related rules, and you want to know, for example, if you're coming in from 5e and you have gold that your party has, for example, to work with, it's giving a suggestion here that one settle point is going to be the equivalent of 35 gold, for example. If you're coming in from like an OSR, it's 25 gold. So this is just if you're actually being very strict and bringing in characters with existing resources to this setting to make their town. There are, as I mentioned, suggestions here about how you can award settlement points at your discretion, basically. This is an example of the building tables, which will list prerequisites for your building, how much settlement points it is going to cost, and how many months it will take each month, and what the resources are. And some buildings need maintenance, so it will explain to you once you've constructed this building how much it takes to maintain it, and if you get any benefits from that, what it will be, and then there's a description of what that building is and does for you. There's a page here that will allow you to make your own buildings that aren't in this book. I think there's 33 or 39 different types of buildings or assets in the book. We'll take a look through them, but if you want to create something that isn't in there, there's some suggestions for how you can do that. And again, to emphasize, you're starting out in a location and you are incorporating the benefits or drawbacks of that geography into what happens with the resources. And you will set out by, if you want to found a settlement from scratch, you have some rules here as to what to do. If you want to run an existing settlement, you have those rules here. There's an explanation of, based on how big your settlement is, how many times you need to roll on the standard tables for morale, crime, and then the building roll based on the size of the town. There's a settlement leadership section, and I kind of started there conceptually with my town. I decided that I wanted my town to be settled by a scholar and by a magician, that somehow were working together to create this kind of magical academy town. And there are leader types that I chose from here, and these leaders will impact the construction costs. They will impact settlement actions that can be taken. So, for example, just to give an example of the scholar, because the scholar has this strong academic background, the cost to build and upgrade certain things like the academies is reduced by 50%. But because the scholar is focused on research and pursuits, the cost of doing certain things like hunting, fishing, scouting, or having a festival is going to be increased. So the leader type is going to impact the various modifiers that you have. Ditto the leadership or the government type. So, for example, if you're running a democracy, you're going to get a modifier to morale +1 and a modifier negative to defense when you're at the village stage. And it will take you through the various government types and how they will impact this. Because everything that you're doing here, if you're following the rules of the book, is going to be based in modifying these, the morale rate, the crime rate, the defense, and the trade, as well as managing your housing, food, and water, and how all of that is going to impact your population growth, your ultimate settlement points that you get, and the population, the degree to which your town is going to be able to grow. Getting more deeply into more developed towns, you have options to create guilds and factions, and you could see that there is a thematic benefit at various levels for various guilds. So if you, for example, have a religious guild, it's going to give you a +1 morale. If you have an explorers guild, you will get a free scouting action once per month, etc. To add theme and story, there are things that you can do like running holidays or creating holidays for your town, and there's a gossip table here that you can roll on to just add some flavor. The degree to which you have that impact the actual mechanics is up to you. It's very flexible. So, for example, this wasn't gossip, but when I was starting this town from scratch, at the outset, we had rumors causing residents to worry about a rival enemy settlement. So what that caused me to do was to try to kind of focus on some more defensive actions early on than I might have. So I allowed that to impact the way that I chose to develop the town. As you go in time passing, you're going to be checking whether you have adequate or inadequate housing for your people, and you will know this based on the tables that are in the book. It will explain to you how many people whatever you're constructing is going to house, and if you don't have adequate housing, you need to roll on the inadequate housing table and then have an impact. People dying, or a certain number of people dying, or people becoming angry and lowering morale, or crime rising, etc. Again, that is going to then impact you moving forward. Ditto for inadequate food. So this is where you can kind of start to see the organic nature of it, because everything starts to get related. The morale table is also rolled on regularly, and this is a D20 roll, but you could have morale all the way up to 30 or down to -9, and the outcomes of the morale table is going to depend on where you land. So, for example, if you have a high morale, residents may organize their own crime watch and catch a criminal, so crime will go down. But if you're at low morale, you could, for example, lose people. After months of hardship, many residents have left the settlement in search of greener pastures. 1% of the population has left, so you need to adjust your population down, and that could impact your settlement, or will impact the number of settlement points that you have. And settlement points are really key to being able to do anything in I'm going to call it a game, or in this system, because as I mentioned, everything that you do is going to cost a settlement point. For example, these are settlement actions that you can take during the course of a turn. You could go hunting, but it's going to cost you 10 settlement points to do. And then when you go hunting, you will be rolling on a table and determining how much food that you get. This determination of the food will impact whether you need to, at a certain point in the turn, roll on the inadequate food table that we saw earlier on. And again, the inadequate food table, if you have to roll on it, you're taking risks, because you could risk losing population, having crime go up, or morale go down, and then that's going to impact your morale table. So you are wanting to keep your population fed, and these are different ways to do it. As you get more into the development of the town, once you have a town hall, you can pay, in a sense, to build and upgrade things faster. That's something you might consider doing. You could have festivals, and festivals can increase morale if you roll effectively on that table. There are things like food storage that you need a storehouse to do it, but if you take the food storage action, you can add a month of food to your sheet, so it will represent the successful storing of food, which could then stave off hunger, which could then stave off rolling on the inadequate food table, etc. So you can really see how it's knitted together. There are military units that can be deployed and trained, and these will come into play at a certain point when doing rolls in the context of the town itself that we're going to see later on. You could even build ships at a certain point. This would take a much more developed town, I think, than I have gotten to or can imagine even getting to. For example, you could even have a warship that you are creating for transportation and defense. The settlement turn will happen. You are going to do some standard rolling on the morale, crime, and building table, and how much you roll on that is going to depend on the town size. At the beginning, this building roll is just it is designed to give you a focus to do an event roll in the building. At the outset, I kind of skipped the building roll because I didn't have that much. There's no point in rolling on a D100 table. You have to keep rolling until you find a place that you actually have in your town. So at the outset, it's easier to just randomize with a few things that you have to get to the tables. And we will look at what the tables are. Before we get there, this sheet is pretty important. It's not really adequately labeled. There are some prerequisites. So, for example, before building a road or a barracks or an academy, any of these things, you must have a town hall. And the things in the first level here can just be, these are the first things that you can build. You can't get a gate without a wall. You can't get dry docks without docks. You need a workshop to get to all these sort of higher order things like a guardhouse, a mage tower, a keep, or a temple. If you have a market, you can get a merchant shop, but you can't get the merchant shop without the market. You can't get the prison without the guardhouse. So this little building tree is important to note. It's not, as I said, I don't think it's quite adequately labeled here, but the prerequisites for the individual things are very clearly labeled within the buildings. And then the bulk of the book is an alphabetical listing and development of the various buildings. And each one is described kind of by what it is. There are 3 levels of every building, and it is explained, as I mentioned earlier, what the prerequisite is. So in this case, to build the inn, you need a level 1 workshop. It will cost you 50 settlement points and 2 months of time, and your resources are lumber and stone. Your benefit for having this inn is you get 5 extra settlement points per month. And then there's a little description here of what it is. When you come to the events section, when you roll on the building table, if you rolled up an inn and you had a level 1 inn, you would then choose a d6 to roll on this table to find out what the event is. So in this case, you would say that at your inn, a wizard has come to town to test children for magical aptitude and has found, and then there's a d4 roll to see what they have found. So in this particular case, we would roll this d4, and the wizard would find many kids or children that have a magical aptitude, and they would plan to stay for training. So you could see in this event and in many of the events, there's not a direct relationship of the event to something that would happen in your town in terms of the town management and the numbers and the morale and all of that. But there is it could be flavor text, or you could use it to drive the narrative direction. So for example, in my town, with the wizard as being one of the founders, this sense that there's magical children might then place a priority in my mind on developing the mage tower more, in assigning resources to things involving that scholarly study. For each of these events tables, you will get to roll a higher level die depending on the level of the building that you have. So level 2, you're rolling a d12, which is giving you access to all of these events, obviously, and then a level 3 is giving you access to the entire table. And as you progress down the table, more significant things will happen. So for example, with a level 3 inn, dragon hunters can arrive, and they could want to help the town defeat a threat. In that case, you would even get a +1 defense modifier. Or they could arrive and they're selling rare dragon items and parts, and then you could decide how or if that would impact your story and your town. And the degree to which that did impact it, of course, is up to you, and it also would depend on what you're using this for. For a solo RPG play, as I said, this could be a game in and of itself. The game is just making your town, telling the story of what happens through the events, keeping it going, and seeing how, there's no particular endpoint. You just see how much you can get your town to grow. You could start that at the very beginning with just the settlers and have it be ongoing. As I said, you could also create a town and a story yourself, or create a town where you will be developing a story out and then just start managing the town or the village where you end up, how you have ended up drawing it, and then try to expand it from there. There is a wide range. We'll just go back here and look at there is an academy that you could build. It starts basically as a humble library, and then it can develop into a major center for learning in your town. There's an apothecary, an arena, a bandit hideout. And again, how you bring these in narratively is up to you. You just make your choices as to what you are going to build once you have the prerequisite number of settlement points in a given month to do it. Barracks, a brewery, a brothel, a cemetery. This doesn't cost very many settlement points, so thematically it's something that you can start to do early on in a town's development, which makes sense that people might choose to spend effort to create a cemetery early on. Docks and dry docks. A farm. This is necessary to produce food. Level 1 farm is going to give food for 500 residents. So if you can get that established and going, it doesn't cost that many settlement points, only 10, and it only costs a month of time. You only need lumber to do it. You can kind of stave off that roll on the inadequate food table for quite some time. So it does pay to sort of sit and think about what would actually happen if I was going into the wilderness with a few settlers. What would we need to do first? And certainly securing food is one of those things. Gates, guardhouses. Guildhall is more advanced, and indeed it's reflected by the cost of settlement points of 50 per month for 2 months. That's a lot. You need a decent number of population to have that amount and also be able to maintain all your other things, and it will give you the benefits. It's more sophisticated cultural things, etc. Houses are pretty basic. They only cost 3 settlement points, and if you have abundant lumber, it's really only actually costing you get the 33% discount, so it's really costing you just 2 settlement points to start to build housing. Hunting camp, we talked about the inn. There's a keep, a lumber mill, a mage tower. There's a market, and the market can generate, as mentioned, merchant shops, and then there are individual types. You could decide what type of merchant shop you wanted to have that would make sense in your town. Like, for example, in my town, it might make sense to have an arcane supply shop. There's bookshops and all sorts of trading and general goods, jewelry, leather shop. Really is quite detailed. There are mines. There's an orphanage. Outposts that you can build that will give you benefits to not only defense and some housing, but also trade. And trade is important. There's a trade settlement action that you can do to increase your economic development of the town. Pastures, those tend to come in early. A prison. Roads, which also benefit trade, they cost a bit, 50 settlement points to make, so those are kind of hard to get to. Stables, storehouses. The storehouses will open up that new settlement action of food storage that we talked about earlier on in the video. Tavern, temple, theater, tower, town hall. This is key because it will unlock a whole series of new buildings, as I showed you in the building tree. Trading company, and wall, the well, the workshop, very important to unlock new buildings as well. And then the back of the book gives you some sample settlements that you can see how they are developed and maintained. And then there's an index and the settlement sheet that we saw, as well as the back page of it, and it is here. And this is a good place to start to talk about sort of my overall thoughts here. I will say the thing that I like least about this entire thing is this settlement sheet. I don't think it is very effective. I ended up really not using it because it will allow you to track the months of completed construction, but you also need to track just sort of how much time is passing in general, not just how much time it's taking you to build each individual house or building. And I wasn't really quite clear on how I was meant to do that using this settlement sheet. So I just didn't really use it. I kept track of, it's useful here to sort of list all the options, keep track of what level you have, and then any modifiers that you have to the building or construction costs on there. But the time passing thing was confusing to me this way, and I just created my own way of keeping track of that made more sense to me. The other piece of it, I would have liked to have seen an actual weather table so that as time was passing, you could roll on weather and have the weather impact, because the absence of that, I mean, it was mentioned here, as I said, but with all the other level of detail, the absence of kind of detailed weather to impact both anything from building to trade was just sort of surprising. But other than that, I found this to be just really rich and live up to its name. It felt organic. It felt going through the process of struggling to settle something at the beginning and spending a lot of time focusing on building housing and trying to get food, versus a later scenario where I kind of came into my town like with the bird's eye view and then started to manage it and try to get a sense of like, okay, now I want to do this, or I had some event that then led me to think I should do that. That also felt very organic and alive and vibrant in a way that is, I think, I haven't seen any other type of living supplement. I think that's what I would describe it as, like a living supplement for your RPG. And whether you are, if you're using this as kind of GM prep, it would give you a feeling like if your characters or your players' characters return to a place, that there was something to do, something might happen. And just rolling on these tables without all the management of it could give you sparks, lots of sparks. You could see there's just tons of tables here, and you could decide what the various levels were to have things happen, and then to use that as a spark to send your characters off somewhere or to have an interaction in the town. And as a soloist, it could operate just as a game in and of itself, that you are just playing this book as a game, and the solo RPG that you're doing is the creation of your town. And I think that works really effectively, and it also has a lot of replay value because you could decide with one game that you're putting your town in a certain type of logistical terrain, and it's led by a certain type of people, like it's, I said, in my case, working with the scholars and the mages. Or you could do something totally different. You could have a military, and a military outpost that you're just focusing on that and developing it. Or you could just draw that town that you wanted and then come to the book to try to maintain it and develop it using the rules of the book. The rules are pretty intuitive. They are linked together in the ways that you would expect, as I tried to show in the video. And overall, this is just it's a really unique play. There's a lot of gameplay in this book.